Hello and welcome to the Chronicles of Yarnia. Today we're going to be trying to rip the seams of a sweater that's been recycled from Goodwill and use the yarn in the sweater for a new project. So we're going to actually be taking this sweater here, and it looks very nice. It's made of 100% cotton. I really liked the yarn, and that's why I want to repurpose it. And we're going to actually take apart the sweater at the seams, such as right there, or you can actually see it better if you turn it inside out. There's a seam right there. So we're going to work with the sweater according to its form and undo it as it was put together. What you're going to need for this is an old recycled sweater, or many old recycled sweaters that are of a good material, such as cashmere or 100% cotton or 100% wool, and something that doesn't have a lot of wear to it, so that when you repurpose the yarn, there isn't a lot of pilling in the yarn to make a nice project for you. Of course, if you like that look, which I've met people from all different walks of life who have different tastes in things, and you may very well like that look, the worn look, go ahead and find a sweater with that sort of style. The point is, you need an old sweater that you're not going to be using for anything, that you can get really cheap. I got this for $4 or $5 at my local Goodwill, and it was actually on sale. So anyway, what I've been doing here is I've been taking the seam, which is a good seam because it's got 2 braids. So if you look at certain seams, they're either made by machine or they're made by hand. This one is made by hand, and you can tell that because there are 2 braids lined up on each seam next to each other, and in between the 2 braids, if you peel them apart, you can actually see that there is a line of stitch work that was done by hand, which is actually of the same color of the yarn. In this case, sometimes they'll use a different color, but I think they wanted uniformity in this sweater, so they just went with the same color. And you can actually see that there is a seam there that does not belong to either of the 2 pieces of fabric that you're trying to pull apart. So what you do is you take your seam ripper and you rip that seam in between the 2 braids, being very careful not to rip the sweater itself. And it's good to just go like maybe 2 or 3 stitches at a time, so you can go slowly and make sure you don't rip the sweater. However, if you do rip part of the edge of the sweater, I wouldn't worry about it too much, because you can just continue the yarn, the ball of yarn that you're recycling from that point. It just becomes a problem when you sort of start ripping multiple parts of the sweater, and which will actually give you very short pieces of yarn to work with. So I am going to do that. I'm going to rip the seams out, and of course if you have a sweater that has a machine-made seam, which you can tell because instead of 2 braids it will be an overcast or surged stitch. If you need help knowing what that is, you can look that up on YouTube, but that makes it very difficult to rip the seam out without destroying the fabric of the sweater. So you want to make sure when you're looking at your Goodwill or Salvation Army or wherever your thrift store is, and you need to make sure that there are good seams to work with in order to undo the seams and use the yarn. So once I'm done doing that, I'm going to have separate pieces, and then I'm going to find the edge of the yarn on each piece and start unraveling or frogging the yarn and attaching it to my ball winder here and winding a few balls of yarn, which I will hopefully be able to make some socks or some other summer lightweight projects out of. So I will get to this, and when I'm done with that, I'll see you right back here and we can work on the next step. Hello again. So I've started taking apart that sweater that we were working on, and I came to find that it was more difficult to probably show on camera than I would like. So I found another sweater that I've also been trying to repurpose, and it's bright yellow, as you can see. And I was able to take apart this sweater. So this is just one of the front panels of the sweater. As you can see, it's got a pocket here. And that will probably be the only tricky part of this part of the sweater, is because it's continually knit, but there is a seam on the side there. So we're probably going to want to, when we get to that point, rip that seam out, but I'm not going to worry about it quite yet. What I want to worry about is finding the end to unravel in this sweater. And I'm kind of searching up and down for where it would be, but I know that it's probably not going to be on the end here, because most sweaters start from the bottom. So this is the cast on edge right here. The cast on edge is the edge where usually you'll see some ribbing, or usually it's at the bottom of the sweater. Most sweaters are knit from the bottom up. But because I can see that this was knit from the bottom up, and that this is a cast on edge, I am going to ignore this end and move up to this end here. And what some sweater makers will do is they'll create an extra row of knitting at the top to keep the sweater from unraveling. And I think that that's what was done here, because if I just go under this stitch and try and undo it, it's as though I'm pulling, it's the same thing as pulling this thread. And this was a thread that was used to connect the two pieces together that I just undid. So I don't really want to pull on that thread, because pulling it just renders the stitches kind of close together and difficult to unravel. So I'm gonna look, and actually you can see right there, there's a little tail. And this is a really well-made sweater, handmade sweater, and a really good example for this technique, because this braid is actually the end of what we're trying to unravel before we get to unraveling the sweater and making it into a ball. So if we can just undo that little end there, which, let me just get that, somehow show you. If I pull on it on the other end, it starts unraveling. And then that gives me one lousy thread, which doesn't help me. But if I keep unraveling and keep unraveling, I will eventually get to a place where it's going back and forth. That's what we want, a beautiful undoing of a seam. So in order to roll this into a ball, and eventually into a hank, and then from the hank we're going to soak it to get the kinks out of it, I'm going to, it looks like multiple strands were knitted together, or else this was like an 8 or so ply yarn, because you can see how there's many strands here that look as though they aren't made to be one strand of yarn. However, we're going to twist those together to work with them, because I don't really want to work with a very fine yarn. This is pretty much as fine as I will go in terms of the yarn I'm working with, just because I'm not terribly patient, and doing other projects with thinner yarn usually leaves me a little bit frustrated. So let me just try and unravel this in here. I'm sorry, ravel this into here, and then secure it at the top, and then I'm going to try there we go, just get it going. And as you can see, it's winding, but it's not winding terribly tight, so it's not going to get out most of the kinks in the yarn. So I'm just going to keep slowly winding as it unravels, and you can watch this unravel as I wind. It's kind of a cool process to witness, because just see sort of the opposite of knitting. This is what we call frogging because you're ripping it. So you're going rip it, which is almost like ribbit. So that's where the name frogging comes from. As you can see, this is forming quite a nice ball of yarn, and I don't even know if I'm going to need to soak this because it actually looks like it's getting most of the kinks out of the yarn. And I'm just going to keep going until I get to the place where I can't go anymore, which is the pockets. So let's go for a little longer and make sure I'm adjusted properly here. There we go. If we can just get that in there, have an easier time. There we go. If your arms get tired when you're doing this, feel free to take a break or switch arms or switch angles. I'm just doing it this way because I've actually secured it to my table, and it's not a very fun process to unscrew the clamp and then re-screw the clamp onto another surface. And this is actually working pretty well for me. So there you can see that's what you do. So some key things to pay attention to when you're unraveling sweaters or other knit garments or crocheted garments in order to create a new project eventually is pay attention to the seams. Always look to see that the seam, as I said before, is a handmade seam with 2 braids parallel to each other, and not a seam that has been serged or overcast with sewing thread. Usually those seams with the serging are just too difficult to get properly unraveled and to get off of your knitting in order to further create your ball of yarn. So once you find something that's hand knit and hand sewn together, you can undo those seams and you'll have your separate parts. You'll have probably a couple of sleeves, obviously, if it's a sweater, and a back and a front. Sometimes if it's a cardigan, you'll have a front panel and a right front panel and a left front panel and then a back. And as you can see, the sweater is now a mess because I've taken it apart, but once I've gotten all of the parts completely taken apart, I can then unravel each individual section and into one ball of yarn and make something beautiful out of it. Always try to work with some fabric that is really good, like 100% cotton or 100% cashmere, or even like, you know, an 80% cashmere with a little bit of other fibers in there, because you want something that's going to give your project some extra oomph, some extra life, something that's going to really stand out when you make it. And try not to get something made of acrylic or something with a lot of nylon or stretch to it. Unless that's what you're specifically looking for, I would advise not to go that route, because it will just make your job of winding the ball that much more difficult. So that said, happy unraveling and happy knitting, and I hope that this video was informative and you learned a lot today. Please look forward to more videos in the future, and we will be with you for a long time, hopefully. So just keep liking the video. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.